Well, good morning, Bay Pres family. Yeah. Hey, you guys are lively. I like this. Hey, if we haven't met in person, my name's Wayne Brown. I am new here. Yeah, thanks. Um, and when I say new, I mean like this is my second Sunday. So, yeah, if you're new here, I'd love to know it because we can be new together, right? Like we don't have to journey this thing alone. I'm the new minister of discipleship. I can't tell you how excited and how grateful I am to be here. I got to meet somebody today for a run, and we went before, like as I do in Houston. If you're going to go for a run, which is where I live currently, you got to get up before the sun comes up. But I noticed, like, if you do that here, you're kind of the crazy person. Nobody does that, right? Like, we were the only people on the trail. But I was super grateful for that. I can't wait for my family to get here. We are trying to sell our house in Houston, so my wife is at home with the three kids. You can definitely pray for her. She's great. So, like, just to let you know a little bit about me, I know there's some videos and some stories we've done to kind of help introduce myself, but I'm Wayne. I've been a pastor in the Houston, Texas area for the last 7 years. My wife, Emily, and I, we've been married. We just celebrated 20 years in May. And, oh, thank you. Yeah. Um, she deserves all the applause because she puts up with me, is really what that is. So, and I know some of you are like, were you married when you were 12? Like, how old are you? Like, I was actually married when I was 24. We were pretty young. I thought I knew everything then. Still learning a lot. But we've got three kids together. We've got a 12-year-old son, Moses, a 10-year-old daughter, Aiden, and then a 2-year-old son, Shepherd, who we absolutely love and keeps us so busy and into everything. We love it. But I can't wait to be here with you guys. We're hoping to get here before Thanksgiving. So we're in this series, and we're talking about a winsome church. What does it look like for us to be a winsome, kind, hospitable place, a group of people that live that way? And if we're going to go into that and continue the series, I think I need to tell you about some folks in my life, one in particular who was winsome for me. And I absolutely needed some winsome people in my life. I was born into a family that we grew up going to church. It was my mom and dad, both sets of grandparents, aunts and uncles on both sides, cousins. Everybody went to the same church. We were immersed in it. And yet, by the time I was a ninth grader in high school, I had kind of quietly decided when it's time for me to graduate, I can make my own choices. I'm leaving. I'm done. I don't want to go to church. This is for the birds. I'm out. And it wasn't long after I kind of quietly made that decision to myself, and I was pretty quiet about it, that there were a series of folks who just showed up in my life. And the first one was a man named Joel. You've never heard of Joel. Joel Eli Trevino was just a firecracker of a human being. Joel showed up as our ninth grade Sunday school teacher because we would go to like Sunday school and then we'd go to big church. That was how it worked at our church there. And he was perfect for us as ninth graders, like just so full of life. And Joel lived a really remarkable life, and he had a really hard life. So when Joel was 18, both his kidneys failed. And then he went through a series of failed kidney transplants and eventually just landed where he was going to be on dialysis for the rest of his life. And that guy had been in the hospital, had more surgeries than anyone I know. He would take us swimming all the time. And Joel was the guy that would never take his shirt off because he didn't want you to see how many scars he had on his body. But that guy showed up and was just so full of joy and so full of life. We kept getting kicked out of our Sunday school class because we were too loud. And some of it was because of Joel. And they finally put us in our own building, no joke. And they still complained about how loud we were. But like Joel was perfect for us. So Joel recently passed away. He passed away this year earlier. He went in for what would have been a routine procedure for him and just never woke up from the anesthesia. And so in June, about 1,000 people gathered to celebrate Joel's life because of the impact he had, not only on me, but on so many people all across Southeast Texas. And there's a story that his sister told that I think sums Joel up. And so she told a story about how when she graduated from college and she met her husband, they started moving around wherever his job took them. So they lived everywhere except Southeast Texas. And then finally, his job brought them back. So they were moving back to the Houston area. They were going to live close to her mom and dad and go back to the church that she grew up in. She was super excited about it. By this time, Joel was hired as a pastor and had been a pastor for about 2 decades at that church, had really just had such a huge impact on people. And she thought, this church looks totally different than what it was when I was here. So I need to just go introduce myself to people. She started doing that. And she started to tell that the weirdest thing would happen. She'd introduce herself, shake somebody's hand. And then if they found out her name was Ruthie, Or especially if they found out that she was Joel's sister, then immediately what would happen is they would go from looking at her in the eye to looking down at her feet and then back up and looking at her in the eye. And it took her aback, like, what is happening? What is going on? The first couple times is like, this is weird. And then the more it kept happening, it's like, this feels disrespectful. Like, what is going on with this place? So after about the third week of this, she's at her parents' house after church, and they're all getting ready for lunch. And man, if you ever got to go to Gloria Trevino's house, Joel's mom, and if you get there when the tortillas are coming out of the oven, oh my gosh, like, it was so good. But anyways, I'm off the rails here. But so they're in the kitchen, and Ruthie is just venting to her family. She's just telling about it. And as soon as she gets to the point where she says, everyone looks me in the eye, and then they look at my feet, and then they look me back in the eye, Joel just erupts in laughter in the next room over. And she's like, what is so funny? What's going on in there? What's happening? And Joel says, oh, you have no idea. I spent about 3 or 4 weeks before you got here telling everyone that the reason you're finally moving back is you just got out of prison and you're wearing an ankle monitor. And that was Joel, right? Like, you can see why we love this guy. So if you want to be winsome, just make up ridiculous lies about your family members and tell everybody, right? Like, case closed. I think we can go have lunch now, like sermon done, right? No, but it's like there was something about Joel that's who he was. And I needed that in my life. I would not be standing here today. I wouldn't have spent time studying the scriptures. I wouldn't have devoted my life to this if it wasn't for Joel. And he was the first person that gave me a ministry job. He hired me as an intern in student ministry and said, I see something in you. And here's the thing. Sometimes I can remember some things that Joel said to me. But it's usually in course of conversation. Somebody says something, I'm like, oh yeah, I heard Joel say that before. I can remember a few things that he did, but I will never forget how Joel made me feel. And he made me feel like I mattered. Sorry. He made me feel like I was seen. And with all the stuff he had going on in his life and in his world, all the pain, he would show up and he'd ask me questions about me. And he wanted to know who I was. I think that's a huge part of what it means to be winsome and a huge part of what we're talking about. Hey, what does it look like for us to be collectively a community of people that are kind and compassionate, that treat people as if they matter? And there's a story in the scriptures where Jesus beautifully unpacks this whole idea of what does it mean to be winsome? What does it mean to make people feel like they matter, like we actually see them and we're glad they're here? And it's in Luke chapter 10. It's the passage we just read. And I want to kind of walk you through that. And by the way, there's so many quotes to other passages in the scriptures. So we're going to go all over the place today. So just like buckle in, come along with me. I'm going to read this from a slightly different translation than what you heard. And part of this is like, here's a chance to let you know a little bit about me. So the church I come from in Houston, we have a really high value on the scriptures. And we absolutely believe that the scriptures are like a portal into the presence of God, that when we enter into this, we can hear God's voice and God speaks to us and it does things to us. It awakens us. It reminds us of his love. It covers us in forgiveness and grace, and it gives us hope and courage to be exactly who he made us to be. But we value the scriptures, and so what our church did is we started a project where we started to pair scholars who know the biblical languages really, really well with artists who know the particular genre of each individual book really well. And the idea was, let's get those two people working and collaborating together. Let's pass it back and forth so that the end result is we get a text that reads accurately to the original language and reflects the poetry and the mystery and the beauty that it was originally written with. So this translation is called The Voice, and it comes out of that collaboration. It was a long-time project. And this particular Bible cover is also, it means something to me because we had a partnership with a church in Buenos Aires, Argentina. And in Argentina, they have a lot of what they call the shanty towns. It's basically urban slums. And so there's a lot of people who live below the poverty line who struggle to make ends meet, struggle to feed their families. And so we partnered with that church and said, hey, we know the beef in Argentina is legendary. There's a surplus of leather. What if you could actually make some leather covers and then like we'll actually put them on the Bible. So that's actually what this is from. This was handmade by some of the folks in Argentina. And I actually got to go be a part of the folks to meet some of those people to tell some of the stories. So it feels like a special part. Like when I open this up, I'm like, yeah, I met that guy. So anyways, so that's the voice. That's what I'll be reading from. So that's why it's slightly different than what's on the screen, but I think you'll be able to follow along. But this is Luke chapter 10, starting in verse 25. And it says, just then a scholar of the Hebrew scriptures tried to trap Jesus. And I love this because it lets us know somebody's putting Jesus on his heels. Jesus isn't necessarily in a safe place. Like this guy's trying to size him up, trying to figure out what's going on, try to put him in an awkward or compromised situation. And the scholar says, teacher, what must I do to experience the eternal life? And I love how Jesus does this. This isn't an uncommon question for a rabbi like Jesus in this day and age. A lot of people would want to know, hey, what's your take? How do I have eternal life? It would have been totally customary for Jesus to tell him, here's what I think. You asked me, this is what I think. But notice what Jesus does. He answers with a question and says, what is written in the Hebrew scriptures? How do you interpret their answer to your question? And I think this is the first part of what it means to be winsome. To be curious, to lead with questions instead of answers. Here's a guy that came at Jesus, who's trying to trap him, and Jesus doesn't respond with judgment or condemnation or defensiveness. He actually starts asking a question like, I actually want to get to know you. How do you read that? What would it look like for us to become a people who, when people are coming into our life, whether we agree with them or not, what if we started leading with more questions as opposed to answers? And so the scholar says, you shall love the eternal one, your God, with everything you have, all your heart, all your soul, all your strength, and all your mind. Remember that, we're gonna come back to it. And then he says, and love your neighbor as yourself. So this is where we're going to start to go on a little bit of a trek and a field trip through some of the Old Testament scriptures, because this guy isn't making this up on his own. He's quoting, and he's quoting from two very common, very popular passages in the Torah. If you don't know what the Torah is just the first 5 books of the Bible. So we're talking about Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And so specifically, he's quoting from some of those. So the first one he quotes from, I want to take you there. It's in Deuteronomy. It's Deuteronomy chapter 6. This is probably the most well-known, most common, most popular passage in all of the scriptures for anyone who is a Jew. And you'll see why. So it's called the Shema, and the reason it gets that name is it's from the first 2 words in Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4, and it says this. In Hebrew, you would hear it say, Shema Israel, right? Hear, O Israel. And so it says this, listen, Israel, the eternal is our true God, he alone. You should love him, your true God, with all your heart and with all your soul and with every ounce of your strength. Now, do you notice something there? The guy who quotes, the scholar of the law who quotes this, actually adds in a part. He adds in with all your mind. Every single person who heard him quote that would know immediately, like, hey, that's not in there. And Jesus knew it too. And the reason they would know this, and this is why it's such a popular passage, it goes on and it says, repeat them to your children. Talk about them when you're sitting together in your home and when you're walking together down the road. Make them the last thing you talk about before you go to bed and the first thing you talk about the next morning. Do whatever it takes to remember them. Tie a reminder on your hand and bind a reminder to your forehead where you'll see it all the time. So literally what they would do is they would take that verse, Shema Israel, love the Lord your God. They would write it on a scroll, and then they would roll it up and tie it, put it in a tiny box that they called a phylactery, and then they would wear that phylactery much like I wear my wrist, my watch on my wrist. Literally, they would see this everywhere they would go. They would talk about it all the time. Every single person who heard him say that knew, like, hey, you added something. And I love that Jesus, with this guy, this scholar of the law, he could have roasted him. He could have like, hey, where'd you get that? You added something. But Jesus doesn't do that. He doesn't shame him. He doesn't rebuke him. He actually is so gracious, he says, you've answered correctly. Do this and you will live. And part of why I think this is important for us to see is I think so many of us have an image and a picture of God as being someone who can't wait for us to mess up, someone who's just waiting for it, someone who's looking for the opportunity to punish us. But what if the opposite is true? What if God is waiting for the opportunity for us to come to him so that he can extend mercy and grace? And that's exactly what you see in the God of the Old Testament. That's exactly what Jesus is doing here, and that's exactly how he responds with this guy. What if Jesus and God are way more gracious than you ever thought? But then he also quotes from a passage in Leviticus, Leviticus 19. Now, this passage in Leviticus is called the Kedoshim, and that it's called that because of the word kadosh. It's the Hebrew word for holy. And what Leviticus 19 does is it walks through, this is how you, Israel, are going to be a holy people. So if you start in Leviticus 19, what you're going to see is the first few verses are going to mimic and mirror the 10 commandments that Moses got from God on Mount Sinai. And then it's going to expand and articulate a little bit more on that. And so what he quotes specifically is Leviticus 18, and then also again in verse 33. And I want you to look at both of them because they mirror each other, but like they also expand on it. So here's what it says in verse 18. It says, "Do not seek revenge or hold a grudge against any of your people. Instead, love your neighbor as you love yourself, for I am the eternal one." And you'll hear a lot that line, I am the Lord, I am the eternal one. You'll hear that a lot in any of the holiness kind of texts. And then again in verse 33, it says this. It says, "Don't take advantage of any stranger who lives in your land." All right, so the first one is very clear. It's about your native born Israelite neighbor, right? This one is even more expansive. It says, "Don't take advantage of any stranger who lives in your land. You must treat the outsider as one of your native born people, as a full citizen. And you are to love him in the same way you love yourself. For remember, you were once strangers living in Egypt. I am the eternal one, your God." Again, that line of I am the eternal one. And so what's happening here is it's talking about what does it mean to be holy. And if you're going to understand this idea of what the Israelites were invited into to be holy, you also need to understand Exodus. So we're going to go back to Exodus, all right? So just like, trust me, here we go. So in Exodus 3, this is where the idea of holiness comes from. And this is the first conversation that God has with a person named Moses, which Moses is the person who then leads the people of Israel out of slavery where they're living in Egypt. And this is what it says. In verse 7 of chapter 3, it says, "The Eternal One said to Moses, I have seen," that's important, "I have seen how my people in Egypt are being mistreated. I have heard their groaning when the slave drivers torment and harass them. For I know well their suffering. I have come to rescue them from the oppression of the Egyptians and to lead them from that land where they are slaves and to give them a good land, a wide open space flowing with milk and honey." This is the idea of holiness. And I don't know about you, but I grew up in a church and in a context where we talked a lot about what does it mean to be holy. And then we were reminded of this a lot, like God is holy, so you should be holy. This is what we're invited into. And what it meant to be holy in that context where I lived and where I was taught was there was a whole list of rules. There was a whole list of things you do or don't do. There's a whole list of words, typically 4-letter words that you don't say, right? There are places you don't go. There's things you don't wear. There's movies we don't watch. There's music we don't listen to. It's like it was all these things. And really, if you could sum up, if I had to describe this is what it means to be holy, I would say things like we're going to be polite, we're going to be proper, we're going to be pious. But this is talking about something way deeper than that goes way beyond that. Because what God is telling Moses here is, I have heard and I have seen the oppression that's taking place in Egypt. And what he's saying is, there's a God in Egypt. He's referred to as Pharaoh, because Pharaoh would call himself a God and remind the people of that. And this God set up a system where certain people could be slaves and oppressed, and we're going to profit off of their hard labor and hard work. We're going to set up a system where the only value that these people have is how many bricks they can make. And what God is saying is, I am the Lord. I am not like those other gods. you're going to treat people differently because I'm going to treat you and everyone else differently. And there's a book by Rabbi Jonathan Sacks. It's called Morality. And I think he unpacks this idea beautifully. This is a bit of a long quote, but I think you'll see it by the time we get to the end. But in his book, he says, the beautiful thing about morality, and he's kind of talking about holiness there, is that it begins with us. We do not need to wait for a great political leader or an upturn in the economy or a new mood in society or an unexpected technological breakthrough to begin to change the moral climate within which we live and move and have our being. He says, I described our current situation as one in which we have outsourced morality to the market and the state. But morality in its truest sense cannot be outsourced. It is about taking responsibility, not handing it away. All it needs is for us to think about the we, not just the I. And immediately we change the tenor of our relationships. When we behave toward others with care and concern, sensitivity and tact, honesty and integrity, generosity and grace, forbearance and forgiveness, we start to become a different person. And such is the nature of reciprocity, itself one of the deeply ingrained instincts that is the basis of morality, that we begin to change the way others relate to us. Not always, to be sure, but often. Slowly but surely, a new atmosphere begins to be felt, at least in the intimate environments in which we function. Bad behavior can easily become contagious, but so can good behavior. And it usually wins out in the long run. And I love the way he wraps it up. He says, we feel uplifted by people who care about other people. And that's the heart of what God is saying to the people of Israelites, to the Israelites, is you're going to be different. You're going to care about the people that are in your midst. You're going to take responsibility over that. And you're going to create a new type of environment in a new world. So that's what this guy, I love that. That's what this guy is quoting from. And that's why Jesus says, you have answered correctly. Do this and you will live. And I love the Greek there. It actually says, do this and you will be alive. You'll be full of life. And I love that because for me, sometimes when I was told about Jesus and we would talk about eternal life, it was all about the afterlife. It was all about getting to some other place when we die. But for Jesus, eternal life is actually about here and now. Yeah. It's about being fully alive now. And when we begin to be these kinds of people, it will do something in us. It will make us fully alive. But he goes on, because the scholar's not quite done, right? It says the scholar was frustrated by this response because he was hoping to make himself appear smarter than Jesus. Now, I'll just say, like, the moment I put myself in the part where I'm trying to look smarter than Jesus, that always goes bad, That never goes well for me. And so the scholar says, but who is my neighbor? And look at Jesus' response, because this is just absolutely fantastic. So Jesus says, this fellow was traveling down from Jerusalem to Jericho. Now, I don't know about you. Do you have those people in your life that you ask them a question and then immediately they're like, oh gosh, I wish I hadn't asked them. Like you just asked, what time is it? And now you're getting the theory of relativity, right? I just want to know if I'm going to be late. So I have a person like this in my life. It's my dad. My dad is a brilliant man. He is a controls engineer, which is part of how we ended up in Houston, Texas from Colorado, because oil and gas, there's just lots of opportunity. He's brilliant. He's got patents for what he does. I don't really understand it, but he basically made a triplicated system that makes sure nuclear refineries and submarines and anything that would be terrible if it melted down don't. And then you can actually check it and fix it while it's still running. Somehow he does it. I don't know. So he's a brilliant guy, clearly had a lot of math. There was a point in time, usually 7th, 8th grade, we would normally ask my mom for help with homework. And then when it came for algebra and geometry and all the rest, she would just tap out and be like, you got to ask your dad about that. So it's like, oh, man. So here's how it would usually go. Dad, I'm having problems with my homework. Can you help me with number 7? And he's like, sure, yeah, so willing to help. He starts reading it, and then you can see the light go off okay, I know what's going on here. Which is great, but then the second light would go off. It's like, oh no, here it comes. And then he'd be like, hey, you know what this theorem, you know what you can use it for? You could actually use this to calculate how much pressure is against the Hoover Dam by the water. And I was like, Dad, no. Like number 7, like I have to turn this in tomorrow. Can we get back to this? It's like, and I have to wonder if the guy asks the question and then Jesus starts saying, so a man goes on a journey one day, it's like, does he feel the same way? But I love this. Look at how this unfolds. This fellow was traveling down from Jerusalem to Jericho when some robbers mugged him. They took his clothes, beat him to a pulp, and left him naked and bleeding and in critical condition. By chance, a priest was going down that same road. And when he saw, remember, like it harkens back to Exodus, where God said to Moses, I have seen the oppression. When he saw, he crossed over to the other side and passed by. Then a Levite who was on his way to assist in the temple. He's up to good work. He's doing good things. By the way, when he got there, he had to be in a certain state of purity, which means he couldn't do things like touch a dead body or other things, or else he would be disqualified from what he was going to the temple for. And if you only worship at the temple, you only go there at certain times unless you live in Jerusalem. Like he's going there for this. Like he's not going to miss it. I get why he's doing this, but it says, again, when he came to the victim and when he saw him lying there, he too kept his distance. And it says, then a despised Samaritan journeyed by. We'll come back to what that means. He says, when he saw the fellow, he felt compassion for him. The Samaritan went over to him, stopped the bleeding, applied some first aid, and put the poor fellow on his donkey. He brought the man to an inn and cared for him through the night. The next day, the Samaritan took out some money, and it says 2 denarii. It's basically 2 days' wages. He basically paid the guy for 2 days, like take care of him for 2 days. And if this isn't enough, I'll repay you next time I pass through. And here's where Jesus comes to the question. And notice what Jesus asks. He says, which of these 3 proved himself a neighbor to the man who had been mugged by the robbers? Jesus never answered the guy's question. Jesus doesn't care who your neighbor is. Doesn't care. Not even going to answer the question. He'd be like, oh, but you don't know who my neighbor is. Like, yeah, that's fair. But I also know this, that the Apostle Paul in a sermon in Acts, he said, God has set the times and places that all people should live. And he has done this so that we might seek him and reach out to him, though he's not far from each one of us. What if God put your neighbor there just for you? But what Jesus does care about deeply is who are we a neighbor to, right? He wants us to be the people who take responsibility, who take ownership. Now, Jesus picked the person in the story to be the hero that he knew this is the person this guy hates the most. So the Samaritans were considered half-breeds. When the northern kingdom had gotten conquered and they were carried off into exile, they made alliances with those foreign kingdoms. They intermarried. They built their own temple, which is a huge no-no. And so they worshiped on a different temple on a different mountain. And that temple's still there. If you go there, I've been there, you can see it. I've seen the pits where they still celebrate Passover and they do animal sacrifices because they have a temple. But this is what made that scholar so frustrated. Is like, these people think they're worshiping God and they're not doing it right. And you can see his disdain in it, right? Because look at how he answers the question. He won't even say Samaritan. The guy goes out of his way. He uses way more words to say, I was the one who had mercy on him. Like, won't even utter the word Samaritan. And here's what I think is interesting for us, is Jesus took the person who made this guy's blood absolutely boil and he made him the hero of the story. Are you a Buckeye fan? He made the Wolverine fan the hero of the story. Are you a Republican? Are you a Democrat? Like, who makes your blood boil? And he makes that person the person who actually did the thing that he's been asking for all along, which was to show mercy. And this is what Jesus is inviting us into. to maybe consider there's more to the people that he's putting in our path. Maybe there's some mercy to be found there. And so Jesus said, well then, go and behave like that Samaritan. And this is what Jesus is inviting us to be people who extend mercy. And we do it for the same reason that God was reminding the people of Israel, remember, you were slaves in Egypt. You were an outsider in Egypt. So you're going to treat people differently here because I'm different. It's the same for us. We go and we be merciful because we remember Christ's mercy for us. We remember what it was like to be riddled with guilt and shame, to be without hope. And we remember what it meant for Jesus to step into our life. We remember that God demonstrates his own love for us and that while we were still being sinners, Christ died for us. And that's why we extend that mercy. So quickly, here's some ways that I think we can do some practical things to do just that. Because people aren't going to remember what we say. They aren't going to remember what we do, but they will remember how we make them feel. So number one, and for all the introverts in the room, like this, feel safe. Pray for the people in your sphere of influence. Pray for them. And maybe you do this. Maybe you get the note app on your phone and you start to work through who's my family, who do I work with, who lives on my street, who lives in my neighborhood. If you have kids, where do my kids go to school? Who are their teachers? Who are the other parents? Who am I likely to bump into in all these places that I'm in? Who's in my sphere of influence? And pick one person in there that you feel led to pray for. Now, I don't feel like I'm supposed to say this as a pastor. It is really hard for me to pray. I never got diagnosed ADHD, but there might be something in there, right? If I'm not moving and doing things, it's just hard. So here's a hack that I found. I have this phone that I carry around in my pocket. It goes with me everywhere. If I set an alarm to go off at one point in the day, every day, it interrupts me from whatever I'm doing. And if I pause in that moment and just take 10 seconds to just pray for that person, it's amazing what that does in my life. So find one person and pray for that one person in your sphere of influence. And then do this. When the time comes, when the opportunity opens itself up, ask that person, how can I pray for you? I don't care if they're atheist, agnostic. If somebody asks, you'll be surprised at how willing somebody is to be like, absolutely, come on, I'll let you pray for me. And it will create a connection. Third, here's where it gets for you introverts, okay, I'm feeling it. Invite that person over for a meal. So I come from Houston. It's a foodie town. We love our food. We love all of them. And then we mix them together. It's all the things are coming together. We have this saying in Houston, it's impossible to hate somebody you have good food with. It's really simple. Invite them over, have a meal. Fourth, smile. Right? I'm just smiling at you and I feel better, it's amazing what that happens. I used to work for Apple and I could see some people on my team across the room and I'm like, oh my gosh, I gotta go talk to JT because he's gotta fix his face right now, right? He just looks angry and he's not, but he just looks like it. It's amazing what happens if we just smile at people. You're gonna have to practice this, but just smile. Number 5, when somebody walks by you or when you pass them just greet them. Just say hello. This is really important for kids because kids in particular often feel like they're not seen. They feel like they're invisible. They feel like me when I'm at the airport, and I've had to be in airports a lot lately, and everything's automated, right? So you're standing there, you're sitting there, you're doing your business, and all of a sudden the thing flushes, and you're like, well, I didn't move anywhere. What's going on? Am I Bruce Willis in The Sixth Sense? What happened, Greet people. It lets them know, hey, I see you. You're not invisible. Number 6, now this one hits home because I like to go on walks and we have an 80-pound golden doodle that's an absolute monster of a creature. And so when I do, I take bags because I pick up after him. But I don't know if this happens in Ohio. You can let me know. There are neighbors who don't pick up after their dogs. And it drives me nuts. It makes my blood boil. So what I've been doing lately is I've been taking an extra bag and just saying, okay, I'm going to be the one to pick it up. There's something about having the humility to say, like, I'm going to take responsibility for where I live, that puts me in a posture that helps me extend grace and mercy to others. And then lastly, and this is another one that might be a little bit, it gets me. But part of that passage where it says, love your neighbor as yourself, it starts with, don't hold a grudge. What if being a really great neighbor starts with telling someone, I'm sorry? And being the one to start something that says, like, hey, I'm gonna work to repair our relationship. I don't know about you, but I've got people in my life that I don't want to say that to sometimes. But what would happen if we became those people who did that? I believe if we became these kind of people, it would be felt everywhere we go. People wouldn't know how we make them feel, and we'd make them feel like they matter. Would you pray with me? God, we're so grateful for your grace, for your presence in our lives, for your voice in our lives. And God, we ask today that you would help us be reminded that we can remember your love, your mercy for us and for all people. And God, will you give us eyes to see and ears to hear the people that you're putting on our path? And may we have the courage to extend grace to them. And we pray all these things in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Amen.